to get this
I'll
along
give it a shout, but if you can dig out terrace.
do you feel free to along the conversation?
Definitely make sure you get that. But, it's been really good. And as I said, we'd love to welcome you back any time if you want to bring your team and have
Such
a
a
tour.
lovely space, so I'd be delighted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Welcome to the Catacomb tour. My name is Wendy and I'm your tour guide. Before we go in, I'm going to have you got a ticket? I'm going to give you a bit of context. Some of you may have done cemetery tours before. I'm going to give you some context. In the early 19th century, when this was designed, it was opened in 1840, sorry, not quite finished. There was actually, if you look around it, it's a rather lot of architecture for a cemetery. And that's because the architects wanted to make this a unique selling point, a USP, with lots of emotional resonance. And in 1840, with an expanding empire, the public schools were expanding. More and more of the aspiring middle classes were getting classical education. So there were lots of people who had knowledge of Latin and probably Greek as well, and who knew quite a lot about ancient history. And of course, they had a Christian ethos in almost all the public schools. And so there was that too. And so people had learnt that, there were facts, there's feelings, and what people learnt was about the early Christians and martyrdom. So, first of all, this was all designed to look almost as if it was the ruins of a major basilica, which of course it's not. It was never one building, and it certainly would have been huge if it had been. It was meant to be a major basilica. We also had catacombs, and actually the facts are that in the Roman Empire there certainly were persecutions of early Christians. But Edward Gibbon, who wrote, an 18th century writer who wrote Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, is actually quite amusing and quite, funnily enough, he's still funny today, quite scathing about the early Christians because they exaggerated. The reason was, of course, that when there were persecutions, Christians tried to hide the tombs of their saints, and obviously the authorities didn't really pursue the burial grounds, they pursued living Christians. So Christians were buried in catacombs, and the tombs of martyrs and saints were moved there. So they had an enormous emotional resonance. And by nearly 1800 years later, well not quite 1500, certainly 1800 years later, that emotional resonance was probably more than the facts. So the idea of building this whole cemetery, which actually rather failed, but was to be, really has sort of high status, because it was such a magnificent classical architecture, and many of the aspiring middle classes had either been to Italy or at least had heard about it in schools. So that's the whole of the cemetery. And why the catacombs? Because of the emotional resonance. Unfortunately, here at Brompton, they never really took off. The cemetery didn't do very well as a business, and there was cost cutting, and some things were never quite finished. So it wasn't the huge success that people expected at that time. Now, we're going to go down into the catacombs. I'll take you down there, and then we'll come out and we'll end with a scandal. I think always fun. Before we go in, I'll point out that the Romans cremated their dead. But the Christians, of whom there are soon quite a lot, and other cults often buried them. And the Roman Empire, like many countries today, was tolerant of your beliefs as long as you didn't challenge the political status quo. So they were quite all right about Christians burying their dead. However, there were very quickly far more Roman Christians than there ever were Jewish Christians, so a lot of the symbolism is pre-Christian. So if I shut this before we start. You'll see these torches upside down, life extinguished. This, and I always laugh at this because just this morning, an hourglass. I don't know if any of you have got one of those ones that Thames Water sometimes deal out at things to make you have a 4-minute shower. But this is an hourglass, which of course symbolises time running out. And it's got wings that symbolise time is running out rather fast. And finally, we've got here a snake eating its own tail. Because snakes shed their skins, they symbolise life re-emerging. And I don't know what the implication of eating its own tail, but one suspects life goes round and round. And actually, in very early Christian times, there were people who believed, at least the belief in reincarnation wasn't banned until a while into the time of Christianity, and so that would have been a very common belief that there might be a reincarnation. So what we'll do is I'll take you in and we'll gather sort of about halfway down, and then I'll tell you a bit more.
Don't like that you wouldn't get in.
Do come down and then we'll gather here. Do come down, please. Do come down. Do come down here. Right, and gather, just sort of gather around these. Here. Right. Come in. Right. Now, this cemetery could have taken about 1,000. Well placed. It never took more than 500. It just didn't take off. It did in Kensal Green, but it didn't here. Do come down. Haven't got everybody here, so please. Isn't that a cheerful? So there we are. Yeah. So do come here. Yeah. So. Why catacombs? When I told you about the sort of emotional resonance, there were other reasons. Sometimes people wanted a temporary resting place because they were abroad or something, and they wanted to send the coffin back home. That might be one reason. It was a middle range option price-wise. It was cheaper than the grand mausoleums, but a bit more expensive and a bit more high status than some of the poorer graves. And that was another reason why people wanted to go. So, unfortunately, due to business problems, these were never actually finished. Now, one of the great ideas was that right along the west of the cemetery, those who know the area, there's a railway line. But when this cemetery was being built and these were being built, there was a street. And so one of the things which the cemetery sold, there were buildings for catacombs there that because of cost cutting were not very well built actually, so that's other problems. But they had catacombs along there. The idea was that you could put your loved one overlooking this rural idyll. Unfortunately, the ground was bought and turned into a railway line, which wasn't quite. So that was a bit of a flop. So, but nonetheless, you might have thought people would still come to these catacombs. They didn't, possibly because they could see that the company was in trouble and having problems, and not as grand as somewhere like Kensal Green. Now, we can, and it's funny because you did have options. You could be side on or you could be length on. Length on was cheaper, obviously, or you could be side on. So, one of the reasons one suspects, if you look at your feet, you will see you're standing on sort of mud. The idea was it should have been paved. We don't know, we haven't got a written record from anybody, but we assume it wasn't paved because of cost cutting. We do know that these were cheaper shelves. I think they're lead. And anyway, they're certainly not the York stone that grander catacombs have. So you can see these didn't quite have the high status resonance that many of the customers would have wanted. Now, if we look up here, you might be able to see, if you look into the ceiling, it's a bit wet. Unfortunately, the lights rather make it difficult. You might just see a sort of oval shape that's very dark. That was how it was originally lit. So it would have been dim daylight. And the idea was, certainly the company seemed to think that, I don't know that we've got any evidence that anyone ever did this. The idea was that people could come and visit their loved ones and sort of read poetry to them and things like that. We have no evidence that anybody ever did anything of the sort, but of course they might have done. When we first used to bring brooms down here, unfortunately, things were not rotting at the rate they are now. And that's just what happens when you have lots of people breathing and coming in and out. These arches are held up by the bricks pressing together, and the centering, there's a wooden, they're still there, but it's rotting at the very end. There's a centering arch thing, which is what the builders used. And when we first used to come down there, that was in quite good condition, and it was quite eerie because you came down and the reeds that have been there for over 150 years were in better condition than they are now. The centering arch was, many of these were, you almost felt that the builders had popped out for a cup of tea and would be back any minute. Of course, they never came, but that's how it was. Now, in order to be buried here, you have to have 3 layers. So you have a coffin, wooden coffin, that's put into metal. And you'll see where it's rotted away that there are marks. Apparently, we believe that was where the plumbers showed that they'd sealed it. They have to be sealed. And then you would have an altar coffin, which of course these are rotting away now. Any questions so far?
What's the significance of the grates?
Yeah.
Nothing. It's up to the families as to what they wanted. So some families wanted grates, bit of glass or something, and some didn't. Some just left them here. There's no, there's very few people down here. Great sort of historical interest. Here we have almost certainly a mother and child. Of course, infant mortality and maternal mortality during childbirth was common, so that wouldn't be unusual. But I always find it slightly touching when you come here and you see that. I find the reeds touching because although they're rotting away, they've been there since a grieving relative left it there. So I'm going to let you go, just have a quick walk. There's nothing much to see down there. Then we'll come back up here. There's a general who was obviously who died much later, but who's a young man, had been at Waterloo. There are actually a lot of ex-Waterloo veterans buried in Brompton Cemetery. There is a society, some military veteran society to do with Waterloo. It's named Waterloo Uncovered. I think they do archaeology at Waterloo, and they come here to find veterans. And we've got lots of them all over the cemetery. So go and have a look.
So one question, please.
Yeah.
Why is the fence still there?
By the fence.
Yeah.
The family chose it. There's no special reason. It could have been to deter body snatchers. There were people who stole bodies in order for dissection and for training students. And that was
Okay.
a Victorian thing. So it may be some families were worried. But remember, this would have been quite hard to do, because one of these coffins, they're pretty heavy, especially when they're encased in lead. We're told that one of them could have been about 200 kilograms. Well, I'm just under 50. I'm 48 kilograms. That's more than 4 of me. If you were wanting to steal something, you'd have to be pretty strong to carry it out. And in fact, we can only assume that where you see those lighting wires go, there are some holes in the wall, they must have had pulleys to lift up the coffins, because how else could they have got something so heavy up there? So actually, body snatching these would have been quite difficult. So have a look, and then we'll come back to near the entrance for our scandal. misquote Oscar Wilde, but to lose one husband in mysterious circumstances may be considered a misfortune. To lose two looks like carelessness. And I'm afraid, although there were two inquests into Charles Bravo, the first one decided, the second one decided he was murdered, but they never had any evidence to the murder. And obviously Florence was the main suspect, but on the other hand, there was obviously a rumour going round at the time that he may have tried to poison her and accidentally drunk the poison himself. And so charges were never brought. However, if you have lost two husbands in mysterious circumstances, especially Victorian times, it doesn't do your reputation any good. And she had been a huge society person. I think there are 3 portraits of her in the National Portrait Gallery. She was such. Alexandra and she had been such the glamour couple of their day. And so, once the second husband had died, it was really hard for her. And she, I'm afraid, also then drank and died, I think about 1878, I can't remember exactly, but she died sometime later. But the scandal is that this is the first husband. There was no, obviously because they were separated, there was never anything to link her with his death, nonetheless. It damaged her reputation, which is sad really, because she had started out as part of a glamour couple. So, okay, it's almost time to finish it. We've got time for a quick question. Anybody got
I have a quick question. You spoke about body snatchers, but I'm wondering whether there were also if people were buried with jewellery or any expensive items, there were any attempts to rob people
They
of
might
that.
have done, but you'd have had, especially if down, like you see, there was a hard job getting into one of these graves, possibly, but they would have had a hard job getting into them. And you'd have to probably get them off. This one you could probably jump on top, but some of the others, you would have to get it off the shelf. And at 200 kilograms, how are you going to do it?
You have enough jewellery.
That was why I asked.
Any others?
Is this replicated on the other side?
I don't know how much. Yes, it is on this bit. I've never actually been on the other side of this big circle.
Yeah.
But I think mostly they're pretty empty. Yeah, they just never got. It's a pity, really. They just never took it as a commercial success.
And so maybe just one more quick question, if I may, Wendy. Can anyone still elect to be in the catacombs today or not?
Apparently not.
No.
I have asked that. So if any of you are hopeful, I'm afraid I don't think that's going to work.
With the jewellery.
No, I understand. The cemetery is still people are buried here, but I don't
Not
think
that
they
big.
allow people in the catacombs.
Are there any ghost stories? Are there any ghost stories?
Not that I know of. I used to teach in the school, because if you're local, are you local?
South.
No, okay.
Yeah.
And they're teaching in Hortensia Road, there's a college, and the old buildings have been turned into flats. I was the one who set them up as a college, this is a long story. But that was said to be haunted, that building, yes, the old building. And I'm dying to know if anybody who bought these £50 million flats or whatever they are ever noticed the ghost. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
We're going to rob this place. Schoolboys, what's the plan? We convinced ourselves that Victoria's parents.
So sorry, what was Florence's, what was her name? Ricardo.
No, she was
We had
Campbell.
no idea what
Campbell.
was in
Then
it.
she married
She's got a schoolboy
Ricardo.
trip.
Then she married Bravo.
So if I look up the EPG, would it be from
It's just we had a
Florence?
Campbell. Try Campbell because she was.
That's true.